welcome to CVM's Budget Debate 2024-2025 Extended Discussion Show. I'm your host, Andrew Laidley. Thank you for joining us. Since Tuesday, March 12, when Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke opened the budget debate, we've been tracking all the major elements and themes contained in the $1.3 trillion proposed estimates of expenditure. Tonight is the final installment in our series, as Minister Clarke closed the budget debate yesterday, Tuesday, March 26. To explore some of the themes of his speech, as well as to clarify any issues that may still linger in the minds of viewers, we are joined by an expert panel, starting with a new addition, Nicole Adamson, Manager for Research, Business Planning and Investor Relations at VM Investments Limited. Chartered Accountant and Taxation Specialist Alison Peart makes a return. And we welcome back economist Keenan Faulkner, who has been with us from our very first discussion show. Thank you all for joining me here tonight on the show. Well, up first this evening, I want to talk about inflation, or what some people might call, consumer prices. And I'll start with you, Nicole. How important is it that we target inflation?
I think inflation targeting, or just the measurement of inflation itself, is really important to everybody. Inflation erodes your purchasing power, so everybody feels it. Persons who are on a fixed income, who, have to make ends meet, have to buy their, food, groceries, pay their rent, pay their mortgage. Inflation erodes that ability to do so. And so inflation targeting, keeping inflation low, steady, predictable, really important to the general public.
So, Alison, we've heard the finance minister really tout inflation targeting, but we've struggled to get there. So is it worth celebrating the whole idea of inflation targeting when we're not even hitting the target?
Aspiration is a wonderful thing. If we don't celebrate, you don't do. So, I always want people to say, this is what we're going to do, hype us up to do it. So, and I also like the fact that we describe what it is, we explain what drives it, and we try to know what contains it. Because even if we want to increase the minimum wage for security guards, increase the minimum wage for helpers, that can drive inflation. So explaining what you're doing, how you're doing it, and saying, here's my target, and I want to keep it in control, I think that's important. Celebrating it too early is also, you sometimes will do some things that you ought not to. But a balance is key, because you have to be a little happy, otherwise you won't do anything.
Yeah, and to follow on from that, Keenan, what is inflation? Just for the benefit of our viewers, what is inflation and what is inflation targeting?
Well, inflation is really just the change in prices year over year. You have different kinds of inflation, calendar year, fiscal year, but if something cost $10 last year and increased by 10%, then now it's $11 this year. So typically 12-month point to point. And I just wanted to say why it is so important to actually target inflation. When you consider the Jamaican experience, our dollar, it has the value of it has lost over 50,000% from since independence. And just think about that for a second. Why in 2017, the central bank came out with inflation targeting as its main mandate. Part of that also helps to keep the exchange rate stable. And the rate is supposed to be between 4 to 6%. So you want inflation to be low, stable and predictable, but not too low where it starts to affect economic activity. Of course, it's important for persons on fixed incomes, and the rate of the devaluing in the dollar has become more predictable, less volatile in the last 6 to 7 years. Other countries target inflation as well. The US targets that 2%. For us, they decided that 4 to 6% is a decent band. If it exceeds that band, then the Bank of Jamaica has to now write a report to the Minister of Finance explaining why that has happened. And so the whole point of inflation targeting is to be able to communicate to the public the inflation expectations. And the Bank of Jamaica went on a very rigorous campaign over the last couple of years, communicating it to the public so that it filters into projections for inflation. So that is the main background of inflation and inflation targeting in the Jamaican experience.
I want to stay with you for a little bit, Keenan, because my understanding is that fiscal policies and monetary policies are supposed to work in tandem. Quite recently, we saw an incident where I believe it was the Bank of Jamaica Governor Richard Biles had to apologize for a recommendation he had made to the finance minister. When we look at the budget as it has been presented to us, are we seeing where fiscal policy is complementing monetary policy?
Well, typically, historically, fiscal policy has tended to dominate monetary policy. It's only in recent years you have seen, especially with central bank independence, monetary policy gaining some amount of prominence. Now, fiscal policy right now could be said to be expansionary, while monetary policy is said to be contractionary. Persons are saying, oh, they're moving in opposite directions. When the government is spending more, it could possibly be inflationary, whereas the central bank is trying to control inflation and manage it to certain levels. So there is some credence in that argument. The budget itself is now, in overall terms, it's 18% higher than it was last year in terms of the nominal amount. When you netted out inflation, it's probably around 8 or 9% in real terms. So I don't think it's that much, right? You want to spend in real terms more money every year, but the main pressure is going to come obviously from wages. That's where most of the increase is. Putting more money in the economy could give an inflationary effect. On the other hand, that money through the givebacks from the tax measures, that represents merely a transfer. If we don't spend the money, government spends the money. It's not like you're putting extra money out there. So the relationship is not quite one-to-one. We have to see what the outturns continue to look like.
Nicole, with everything that we just heard, Keenan talk about, why should the average person, why should the average Jamaican care about inflation? What are the implications of inflation on the average person?
Well, before I answer that question, I wanted to carry on from what Keenan was saying, that I would really love to hear more of an articulation of how the two approaches interconnect, how fiscal policy and monetary policy will complement each other. And I don't, over the years and even this year, I have not really heard, how the two will work in tandem to achieve the overall objectives of the government for the economy, to grow the economy, to keep, the macroeconomy stable and predictable. So I'd really love to hear that kind of articulation going forward. As to your question about why the average person should care about inflation, it comes back to affordability, right? Most of us don't have the ability to just go out and earn income on demand to meet our needs and our wants for expenditure. And so inflation is going to impact that kind of ability. And so it's really important to know that you can plan for the next 6 months, for the next few years, how you're going to be spending, how you're going to allocate your income that you expect to get.
I'm going to throw that question to you, Keenan, so I'm going to give you some time to ruminate on it. But I do want to come to Alison. What's your spin on consumer prices for the average Jamaican?
If I keep saying I'm from the country. If I look at my relatives from the country, or, and they hear all of this, it can be sounding like mumbo jumbo. It's all these learned people coming and we're talking, etc. All I know is when I go to the supermarket, things are expensive.
Exactly.
You can also find people saying, but Lord, I have to pay my helper more. Or the raise that I got was only 8%. What can I do with that when I go and I realize that my fruits and vegetables are so expensive? So one of the things that I think we've done better, we're explaining the budget and the process better to the average person. However, the average person is looking at, they have to eat, they have to go to work, assuming you're employed, or you have to go to school, you have to consume a basic amount. And they're saying, but with all of this, I'm still paying more, and I don't feel like I can catch up. So in terms of talking about monetary policy, fiscal policy, and the inflation, the average person listens and says, yeah, but why the price gone up?
Yeah,
and
what does
you
that
gave
mean?
me, what you gave me, not paying for the food I need to buy. I'm looking and seeing prices going up and my pay not increasing. So if you look at the security guards or the minimum wage earners, they could say to you, but that increase didn't match what I have to pay. So I'm just saying what the average person is hearing and feeling. We tend to go based on feel. You know, what happens, what hit my bank account? What money do I have left after I've paid what I need to? Can I stretch my money? Because,
Right.
you know, as was mentioned, you can't necessarily go and find a job, an additional job. There are only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much you're paid.
Right.
So for me, my average country person, they're just looking at, yeah, that's great that you guys are talking, but my daily life is still expensive.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there for this segment, so stay with us. Our Budget Debate 2024-2025 extended discussion show will continue in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching CVM's Budget Debate 2024-2025 Extended Discussion Show. I'm Andrew Lately. Now, I want to start by throwing to Keenan on that point that Nicole had made for us to understand the interconnection between fiscal policy and monetary policy. And if you could also really quickly just explain the difference between the two.
Right, so monetary policy is pursued by the central bank, and that concerns interest rates as well as the foreign exchange rate, whereas fiscal policy relates to government spending, expenditure, borrowing, and so on. So fiscal policy means, okay, government decides that it's going to maximize its revenues as well as control its expenses for this year. It wants to run a surplus, it wants to pay down debt, it spends on these social programs, and so on and so forth. Monetary policy, on the other hand, would be now what's happening with the interest rates. Interest rates are currently going up. Well, it has remained at the same rate for quite some time now, as well as...
and by interest rates, we're talking about the cost of money.
Yeah, the cost of borrowing money, and also in the foreign exchange market, you know, sometimes the Bank of Jamaica intervenes in the market to manage the volatility in the exchange rate. So those are the key differences between the two. I want to speak more now on inflation. So Jamaica's highest ever recorded inflation in a single year in 1991, after we had liberalized the economy, was 80%. So that, imagine something costing $100 this year and then $180 the following year. So that's why managing inflation.
The same thing.
The same thing, you know, and there has not been any increase in supply or any demand for it. The same thing costs almost double the following year. Now, we don't want to return to that experience, and that's why inflation targeting is so important. You know, persons are asking, how do you target inflation? Well, you target inflation mostly by controlling the money supply, right? You know, you want to determine how much money is in the economy. Right now, when interest rates are going up, it disincentivizes people to borrow money. right? So it takes money out of the economy because inflation happens when you have more dollars chasing more, fewer goods. And that means that the price of the goods raises to match the level of money in the economy. Now, raising interest rates takes it out. Lowering interest rates puts it back in. I know people want to borrow and at the low rates on their cars and houses and so on. So that is really how monetary policy works in that respect.
Right. Thank you so much for that breakdown, Keenan. I want to jump over quickly now to NIR, foreign reserves, which is at a record high level. I believe it's now at 4.7 as at February. What is the importance, Keenan, of having your record high foreign reserves?
Well, it's what, financial stability of the entire country. So at $4.7 billion, that translates to almost, I think, 40 weeks of imports. Right. You want a buffer, right? In case anything should happen, you have enough FX to pay for imports, enough FX to, for the financial sector stability and so on. There was a time when it went all the way down to less than $1 billion. And what the finance minister mentioned as being most of it now is non-borrowed. So it's strictly from the FX operations of the Bank of Jamaica, whereas now out of 4.7 billion, you have only 85 million in certificates of deposit. Previously, it was half, half of it being borrowed, and then you have other liabilities to the IMF and so on. So it gives us an important external buffer, right? Our external position is strengthened by having more reserves in the bank.
Alison, should the average person be concerned about the fact that we have the highest NIR that we've had since independent Jamaica? Like, what?
Yeah.
Why should
because
they care?
It matters to you in terms of your foreign currency. We don't like when the dollar is running away because things become even more expensive. So in terms of putting it back to the average man, it's for me, I would love to get the Jamaican dollar back to where it used to be when we first started out.
Is that even possible?
I think it is. If we always have hope, things can happen. The minute we have negative output, So I think it can happen if we have good monetary policy, good fiscal policy, good NIR. We can hopefully, if a couple of things, we start to eat what we produce. Right, Keenan?
Yeah.
Don't import as many things, so we don't need as much foreign exchange. If we start to find a sector that is here, that we are the drivers of. I mean, when I started out in high school, there was no internet. If we were the discoverers of the internet, do you know how much money we would have? There are lots of technology out there that Jamaica could be pioneering. So I don't give up hope that we could one day go back to 1-to-1 or even higher. But it means, that's why I asked, the average Jamaican. The average Jamaican needs to understand that these are the things that we need to do to get back there. And if we don't do them, that is why we're at 155, 156. We keep moving the dollar in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, our demand for USD is far, let me not say far, it is exceeding the supply of USD, and so that results in depreciation. But if you want the dollar to go the opposite direction now, yes, it can appreciate and get back to certain levels before, but that's not a process that can happen too quickly. And if it does happen,
not an overnight.
If it does happen too quickly, that's going to have a negative implication on the external accounts. So you would want that to be sustainable, and then you realize that the currency is actually a two-way movement. And the volatility is so low. The average depreciation has been around maybe 3 to 4% over the last couple of years. When you think about the 80s, the 90s, the 70s, it went from $1 to like $3, in a couple months. That's like too much.
So which is why we want to plan it. So you're exactly correct. It's like if you don't want to win the lottery suddenly and don't know what to do with it because you'll have chaos, right?
Yeah.
Agree?
Nicole, what's your take on that? And do you believe Jamdex is the answer?
Well, I want to speak about, the NIR supporting stability in the foreign exchange market. And we talk about, the expectations of the depreciation in the dollar. I mean, most of us come to expect that the dollar is going to depreciate. I mean, in recent times, less dramatically so than back in the day. And even if you look over the last few years, we've been around about the 150 to 155 region. So it's kind of been stabilized in that region, which facilitates what we're talking about, that kind of planning that you're able to do for your business, for your personal expenditures, etc. So I think it's important that NIR be, provide that buffer and that stability that we need in the foreign exchange market.
Yeah. When we look at digital currencies, though, is that something that we're thinking could help to get us back to where we want to see the Jamaican currency?
I think digital currencies is giving us other options. Certainly from the investment sphere, we're looking at digital assets as an alternative option to drive that growth in capital for investors. So, I mean, I don't know if it will impact the exchange rate, but certainly it gives that other option.
What say you, Keenan?
Yeah, I think it does give another option, in terms of efficiency, advances in technology. It would be difficult to say that it's going to increase the demand for JMD vis-a-vis the USD, because that's really what will drive the appreciation of the exchange rate. But if it's a modality that causes more people to use the Jamaican dollar and to demand more of it, then possibly it might incrementally cause it over time.
Yeah, Keenan, hold that thought. This is CVM's Budget Debate 2024-2025 Extended Discussion Show. We take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Budget Debate 2024-2025 Extended Discussion Show. I'm Andrew Laidley. Still with us in studio, Nicole Adamson, Manager for Research, Business Planning and Investor Relations at VM Investments Limited. Also, Chartered Accountant and Taxation Specialist Alison Peart and Economist Keenan Faulkner. Alison, when we look comprehensively at the tax incentives announced by the Finance Minister, were they a hit or miss?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, because you can't please everybody. And I always say I always want more, more, more. In terms of what we can afford, I think he did give back where he could. We heard discussions between what the $20,000 should do, the $20,000 reverse tax credit. I can tell you that name kind of confuses me as a tax person, because a credit is a give back. So normally when you pay income taxes, if you have a credit, it reduces your tax. When you say a reverse credit, I wish you would rename it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that one, he clarified actually, because a lot of us were a little confused what it really meant. And he clarified that it was a one-time payment and how you would get it. When it comes to incentives, it's not just what the Minister of Finance said. The Prime Minister also gave back quite a few things. So when you look at the budget, overall, quite a lot went back. What we have to make sure, though, is that we can afford to pay for it and that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we run a deficit. What we want to also look at is it enough for what we're trying to do? Is $20,000, will that really make an impact on somebody who really needs more money? So it's a start, but I always want to have a little bit more. So in terms of saying, is it enough? I really think that when we look at the budget, we could do more, but when you look at what's paying for it, I've said it before, the securitization, I would want more money, because it could be, you're bringing, as an accountant, you talk about future cash flow, moving them forward. The budget is on a cash basis. So when you bring it forward, and if you don't have that source, that's more taxes next year. So for me, I would always want more, but when I see what was used to pay for it, we don't know until we see how this year plans out whether we can do more. Personally, I would love to see Jamaica employ more of our people in higher skilled jobs so we don't have to immigrate. I would hope for us to get the crime under control. I would hope that we could do our education a lot more. We talk about education tax, but is that money really going into education?
Yeah, where's it going?
Right. When you look at our hospitals, if you're sick, when you look at what we are doing with our police, all of that works together to keep the country moving in the right direction. So when you talk about incentives, incentives are to help you where you somehow are falling behind. I really want us to move towards getting our Jamaicans better educated, feeling safer, and making Jamaica somewhere they want to stay, or if they're overseas, to come back.
Nicole, from your vantage point, based on what the finance minister spoke about in terms of his revenue measures for the upcoming fiscal year, what are you hearing? Are people pleased about what was said? Could he have done more?
So the thing with it is, this is the 7th year of no tax increases, right? He has removed certain taxes, created greater space in the taxpayers' pockets. And so, I mean, those persons who would directly benefit will be happy about little benefits. As Alison says, people will always want more, you know? In terms of the investment space, I see where he has done increase the threshold for the junior market. I mean, the stock market has been struggling for a few years now. Granted, we had COVID, right?
Right.
But still, we are coming on out the back end of that now, and the stock market is still struggling. And so it's probably, you know, a little welcome to have that little stimulus in the junior market to get persons looking at the stock market again for listing, for seeking out capital, to give it that kind of jump start that probably needs to get going again. But really, I mean, what's going to drive the stock market is opportunities for the companies. If companies are performing well, then it should eventually reflect in the stock prices. So, I mean, that's something that we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree with you. Keenan, to a point now that the Prime Minister addressed, and that's the increasing the minimum wage. The pundits, some pundits have been saying that, you know, we should be worried about job losses, especially in the realm of small businesses.
Yeah.
What say you? Should we be worried about that?
I don't think it's as great a concern. You know, if you look at economic theory, of course, persons will say if you raise minimum wage, then, you know, widespread unemployment is going to start to occur. Whereas you might have some instances where employers are forced to lay off persons. I don't think that's going to be the general experience, you know. And you also have to consider that some employers are paying above minimum wage anyway, right? The fact that minimum wage has increased by 142% in the last 8 years, yet during that time unemployment has moved from 13% to 4%. It really just shows you that the relationship is not precisely one-to-one. So yes, maybe one and relatively fewer of the overall amount may have to consider that, but I don't think it's going to be the widespread experience.
Alison, what say you about this? You know, the minimum wage has increased, but you know, arguably not enough. You know, you said people always want more, and the possibility of some persons also losing their jobs on the back end of that decision.
The way the economy is looking now, if you lose it, you'll find it somewhere else. There are so many people looking. And I mean, when you look at security guards, they put their lives on the line for us in a lot of instances. So when you look at what you're getting, one of the things too, when we raise the minimum wage, we also have to look at the fact that further up the chain from the minimum wage, there will be some movement, but we also want to look at productivity. You don't want to just give money for nothing. And one of the reasons why, you know, I don't think you're going to lose jobs is people want to be more efficient with AI, with all, you know, with the costs of living. But if somebody were to lose their job because of this increase, I think they will find another, because with unemployment so low, it's not going to be hard to find something for you to do.
So Nicole, then, what would
Well, the job market is changing, right? So even aside from the minimum wage, I mean, if you're not retooling yourself, educating yourself in, areas that employers are going to be demanding labor or, skills from you, then your job is at risk regardless. So the labor market itself, the labor landscape itself is changing.
I wanted to ask you, what would you say to, an entrepreneur who hires maybe, one, two, three persons who are saying that, boy, it's difficult for me now, at the bottom line, but I do want to keep my staff and I do want to stay in line with the law. What are some of those creative ways you think that, such a person can employ?
I mean, I think the entrepreneurs themselves are really creative.
Yes.
They've been creating all kinds of jobs that we never saw just a few years ago. So, I mean, they can educate me on those creative ways of creating jobs.
Keenan, how about you? What are some of those creative ways they can employ?
In terms of
Keeping their staff and not, letting staff go.
No, I think, the goal really is to not pay at minimum wage. If minimum wage went up by 15%, then whatever you had been paying before, you should also offer maybe something above that, right? I think mostly the pressure on wages in the market is not at the lowest end. It's really in the middle, where persons know, for the most part, that 4.2% as unemployed are mainly moving between jobs. So it's structural, as we said here, the persons at the lowest end of the labor market, with labor dynamics changing, persons are upskilling, offering those incentives to upskill is also another way, I think, to best retain talent. And then we also think about conversations around a living wage, right? You don't want to aim to pay the minimum or even below the minimum, not just because it's a legislative requirement, whether it's market determined or not. If I want to keep staff, I have to pay them, appropriately.
Right. So
and
pay a livable wage.
You talk about what strategies. There's also job sharing. Some of the things that employers can do, if you think it's just too expensive, instead of removing staff, you could reduce hours and say, let's work together. And perhaps when you talk about upskilling, sometimes we don't give our staff the opportunity to do more things. We tend to look at you as what you came in as.
Right.
So if you came in as clerical, maybe you can help the person, in a different way to pay for university or pay for some college courses to become your accountant. So I think, you can change the way you do the job. You don't have to be 9 to 5. I know there's a push to get everybody back in the office, but I think some of the things we learned during COVID, we should not abandon. AI is here. We have to embrace it. So when it comes to cutting costs and being efficient, you're not cutting your staff. You want to make them more efficient and put them in a space which they will be more interesting. I can tell you in the accounting profession, people think, oh my goodness, the robots are going to replace you. The robots, I can't project the future, but what I want the robots to do is to replace the mundane work, the tax return that you're just tired of seeing. So that is where I'm saying, if you're an entrepreneur, they're very creative, job share. Use your secretary, teacher to become the accountant as well. So you will find that one job becomes 2 or 3, and you're paying more, but you're getting somebody that may be more happy in terms of what they're doing, and find that they're a partner of yours, not just a staff.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea that you've given there, Alison. Nicole, now I want to circle back to the idea of economic growth. We've heard the finance minister say that we are at a place now where we can really catapult ourselves into the future. And we've seen the ratings agencies and, what they've said about our country. However, when you look at the average Jamaican on the ground, they're saying that, well, the finance minister is talking about this, but I'm not feeling this, and we started out talking about inflation. What say you to that person who is saying, I'm not feeling it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real issue, right? I mean, the economy itself, Jamaica's economy for certainly my entire lifetime has struggled to grow at any kind of exceptional rate that we would see in other countries. I mean, even now where we have had a period of economic growth, 2 to 3% is what we are looking at. And it comes back down to, this high inflation. And when will we get a hold of our inflation control? I mean, young persons now, they are accustomed to a lower single-digit rate of inflation.
Right, that's
and
true.
so, I mean, when I hear persons talk about 6% inflation being high, I remember when it was 80%.
Careful, you're damaging yourself.
Right? But I think it takes time. Economic growth is not something that you're going to feel it, bam, right away. It's going to take time to filter through to all areas of the economy, and the inflation is really what erodes that. So we have to get that under control.
Yeah, how about you, Alison?
I think we need to do more planning. Every day we're one foot closer to leaving the planet, and we have younger people coming. What are we doing to train them to replace us better? So for me, I find we do too much short-term planning. So, for example, our schools, are we really pushing people to do better, to take on jobs that we're going to need? Are we producing with our education dollar the types of skills that can be transferable into what it is that we need?
Alison, I have to stop you right there. But we'll continue. This is CVM's Budget Debate 2024-2025 Extended Discussion Show. We take a break. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to our closing segment for Budget Debate 2024-2025 Extended Discussion on CVM TV. So in this segment, I want to talk about social issues and what we saw in the budget, Keenan, that spoke about social issues. And do you think it was given adequate attention?
I think it was given a sufficient amount of attention, yes. The overall, especially on the Prime Minister's side, the budget itself between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister would have tried to show the link between the government's fiscal policy and its social policy. And now the approach seems very incrementalist. You want to target the persons who are at the lower end of the scale. When you look at even the tax givebacks, you look at the initiatives through HEART, you look at the initiatives through NHT. They are supposed to be very carefully crafted and specifically directed to the most vulnerable segments of the population. So, whereas some persons might be saying, what's in the budget for me? On the wider scale, the question really ought to be, how best can this budget address the needs, even in a meaningful way, of persons who are at the other end? The things that think about social protection, you think about health, you think about education, even national security. And all of those issues, the government's social policy being influenced by its fiscal policy, we are now opening up space so that we can spend more on these items to better deliver services to the public. You think about even those things that are not the most exciting topics, such as procurement. You want to be able to, you don't want your garbage trucks to be late as a result of whatever issues, whether it be procurement or whatever else. You want your buses to be on time, because if those things don't come around often, I'm going to be upset at the political directorate. And so that is how you translate fiscal policy to social policy, so that persons can feel it, they can see it, they see that these are tangible improvements for health, sanitation, nutrition, so on and what have you.
Yeah. Well, Alison, with everything that Keenan just spoke about in terms of the healthcare system and the education system, we heard a lot about incentives for young persons who want to study at heart. We're still seeing, for example, if the average person picks up themselves, and wants to go to the clinic, for example, or wants to go to the hospital, it's a grueling experience, right? So what needs to be done then? Because we see a lot of spending happening, but the people who we interact with, firstly, it's challenging for us to say that this is not the world-class system that we're spending so much money on.
I think it's typical financial literacy. It's not what you make, it's what you do with it. So when you have the revenue and it's allocated, one of the things we need to do a better job on is quality of spend. Are we just spending money for spending's sake? Are we checking to make sure that the money that is spent where it should and spent properly? We tend to spend a lot of time in procurement to ensure that we don't have corruption, or I don't think we spend enough time on making sure that the controls are in place to get the money spent efficiently. So if you're going to allocate money to the health sector, you need to make sure that what you're allocating it to, it really is going and it is doing what you ought to do. When you look at wastage of money, in that you say you're going to do something and you get tied up in procurement. I hear the changes coming to procurement. My concern is I'm not seeing the auditing that I'm not hearing. For example, even when I see what the Auditor General produces, those reports are some years back.
It's back.
They're not recent. So we would need to staff her organization up, because she does an excellent job, to make sure that what we're getting is value for money, because the government money is our investment. When we invest in property, when we put our money in bonds, we'll look to see what is our return. What is our return on the dollar we're spending? So we have all of these social, incentives, etc.
Like garbage trucks,
all of that. But the spend, when you look at it, are we getting value for money, or are we just throwing money without properly planning? So I'm saying all of this to say we need to go back to the drawing board and look to see what is it that we want. What do we want our education system to look like to funnel the jobs of tomorrow? What do we want our health sector to look like? If we don't do those fundamental things, if we don't make sure our teachers are properly trained and properly compensated, if the police officers are not paid enough, we have to step back and look to see what are the fundamentals that we need, how are we going to do it, and don't look at government to government. We need to do 10, 15-year planning, and it doesn't matter who is in, we're still Jamaican. So I think we need that value for money.
Yeah, Nicole, what do you think about that? How do we make our money work for us on, in these social realms and in the area of social issues?
Yeah, so I think the government has done a fair job of addressing vulnerable groups within this budget, and I think the approach has been stepwise as they are able to afford it. What I would say, though, is that more so than the government being directly involved in, directly addressing social issues, is putting in place that enabling environment so that persons can have jobs, persons can earn proper wages, persons can help themselves if they need to access health care, education, etc. And so it comes back to, is the macroeconomy in a good place and going in a good direction? It comes back to planning. I mean, when we look at the budget, we typically focus on the 1 year, but are we looking at the medium term, the 3 year, the 5 year, so that we can see what is coming down the road, so that we can plan properly and put things in place?
And that's the planning, I believe, Alison.
I don't like when we switch governments, we flip-flop. I think we need certain things we just have to stick to.
Yeah. Keenan, this question is for you. In relation to the budget, what are some of the metrics we should use to determine whether the government policies were a success coming out of this budget?
I mean, if you're evaluating a budget, you want to look at the percentage that was actually spent on what you have programmed for the year, because overall, yes, things can happen in the course of a fiscal year. You have a supplementary budget, other expenses come up, and maybe you have to use some of your overperformance in revenue to address that. But this is particularly, I think, relevant to capital expenditure. You have found that you have planned these grand projects, and then no, they can't be executed for one reason or another, and it's because something happens, it goes back to procurement again. It had to be returned to the consolidated fund. These things get jammed up in so much bureaucratic tape and so on. So the best way you want to ensure, especially growth on the capital expenditure side, because those are the growth-inducing initiatives, is by removing or reducing those structural bottlenecks. You want to take away whatever source of inefficiency happens. Then you think about all of the other wider social things like, crime, corruption, the cost of energy, skills training and education. That is how you maximize on what you're trying to do. And then you look at on the non-capital expenditure side, the recurrent side of the budget. How much did we allocate to this? Why was it not spent? This is how you hold the budget itself, accountability, transparency. When it's returned to the consolidated fund and it rolls over to the next year, we need to know why was it not spent, how much was not spent, how much was actually spent, and was this actually spent on what we said it should be. Those are good metrics, I think.
So, Alison, do we need a budget watch then?
Yes, we do. What I would love for the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister, when they start a budget, itemize what they said last year and what actually was implemented. Because sometimes in the speech it's the same thing I heard from last year. It just wasn't done. So I guess it's the auditor in me. Start the speech by saying, okay, here's what I achieved, not 20 years ago or in a different, here is what we announced, here is what was done, here is why it was not done. And true up and be honest with us.
Yeah. Nicole, they always say what gets measured gets done. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I'll go back to where I started, which is I'd really love for the budget to be couched within the framework of the fiscal policy and the monetary policy that is really properly articulated. And then what I would want to measure is the results of that. How is the economy performing? And we didn't talk a lot about interest rates, but in my sphere, interest rates is something of a central focus right now. We're looking to the central bank to see, when can we expect to see a reduction in interest rates? Right. We don't have a proper sense of that. We kind of are just shooting in the wind and kind of speculating. And so I would love to be able to track where that is going and see where that's heading.
Yeah, interesting points there. I'll see if Governor Biles will address your concerns the next time, we have a meeting with him. All right, so we're almost at the end of the program now. I want to give you all the opportunity to share, your final thoughts on the budget and the outlook going forward. Keenan, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so the budget debates were very colorful. It's not easy to debate on $1.3 trillion, and it's only going to get bigger every single year. Some of the major things coming out of it, the fact that wages are so high, it seems to be crowding out other non-recurrent expenditure. The increase in capital expenditure is a good thing. The measures itself, socially, it being targeted while also maintaining debt on the downward trajectory that we hope for it to become 60% in the next 3 to 4 years, because that's a big thing that I don't think many persons were speaking on as much as we should. So the overall, the budget, I think it finds a balance. It strikes that balance between maintaining fiscally sustainable policies while now incrementally being able to realize the fruits of our economic gains over the last dozen years.
Alison.
Well, the Minister of Finance said that he was in alignment with the opposition on the changing the tax filing deadline.
Right.
But due to the money involved, and I keep saying, guys, we don't need one deadline. If you move it immediately, everything, then you're going to need all that money. You don't need something covering it. You may end up with a deficit, because if all your money comes in, or the majority of it comes in March, and you move that to April, you're going to have a deficit. But my view, disaggregate it. For the first year, keep the corporates March 15th, move the personal to April 15th, and do it gradually so you're not getting that hit. So it's great to hear it is something they agree on. My concern is it may never change, and we'll still be fighting with a March 15th filing deadline.
Yeah, well, I hope, the word gets out. Nicole, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway was that within the context of reductions in taxes, we have, over the past few years, still been able to increase tax revenue. And so it speaks to the fact that you're creating better space for economic growth to take place. And so that has been working. So I'd love to see that continue, that kind of fiscal responsibility that the minister spoke about, see that continue.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's definitely the agenda and the way forward that the finance minister is looking at. Well, that's where we draw the line under CVM's extended coverage of Budget Debate 2024-2025. Many thanks to our guests, Nicole Adamson, Alison Peart, and Keenan Faulkner. On behalf of the entire production team, I'm Andrew Laidley. Pleasant viewing.